My name is Han Jae-min. I was born on a street that smelled of salt and diesel. Busan's jagalchi market, where mornings began before light and ended after exhaustion. My mother sold mackerel and anchovies, her fingers always red from brine. My father repaired engines for the fishing boats that never quite worked right. We lived above a shop that never slept. The sounds of waves, vendors, and radios mixing like prayers for survival. As a child, I believed success was silence. That one day I'd live where I couldn't hear shouting through thin walls. When I studied, the world outside was chaos. Carts screeching, men cursing the wind, women bargaining over dead fish. Inside my notebooks, numbers stayed obedient. They listened. I learned early that control was the closest thing to peace. At 12, I started calculating my mother's daily profit margins for fun. She laughed at first, then frowned when she realized I was right about her loss rates. By 15, I was tutoring the children of richer families. Their mothers gave me fruit and soft words. Their fathers gave me looks that said, "You don't belong in this house, boy." I smiled, bowed, and memorized everything. Scholarship to Yonsei University, the first in my family to wear a suit that wasn't for funerals. My parents didn't understand the city. They just called it the place where you stop being poor. In Seoul, poverty wasn't loud. It whispered through worn shoes, accents, cheap shampoo. Every time someone asked what district I was from, I learned how to lie politely. I called it adaptation. I studied economics like it was scripture: demand and supply, profit and loss, risk and return. But no textbook warned me that greed can sound like ambition when spoken fluently. I graduated top of my class, but what I really majored in was envy: how to hide it, how to feed it, how to make it look like hunger for progress. At Daehan Capital, they called me precision incarnate. I wore restraint like armor, punctual, clean, silent. In a world of noise and arrogance, silence looked like discipline. In truth, it was fear. The same fear that kept me from arguing when teachers miscounted or when my father's boss shouted. I had learned to survive through obedience. But obedience, I later discovered, is fertile soil for corruption when watered with ambition. At first, I was proud of my small desk, my 2 monitors, the skyline glittering beyond the glass. I sent my mother a photo. She said it looked like a spaceship. I told her I was learning to fly. She didn't know that inside those towers, flight meant climbing over others quietly. My superiors liked me. Not for who I was, but for what I could erase: doubts, emotions, questions. They said I had the right temperament for finance. That meant I could watch millions vanish without blinking. Still, I tried to stay decent. I donated a little. I sent money home. But as my salary grew, so did the silence between me and my past. I stopped visiting Busan. The city felt too small, too honest. When my mother called, I answered during taxi rides, half listening. When she said, "You sound tired," I said, "That's how success feels." It wasn't a lie. Not yet. I was 30 when the first hairline crack appeared in my reflection. A client dinner, wine older than my gratitude. A senior broker leaned in and whispered, "Do you want to stay good, or do you want to stay employed?" The table laughed. I laughed too, because that's what survival required. That night, in the restroom mirror, I saw something new in my eyes. Not pride, not joy, calculation. A quiet readiness to cross small lines, just to see if the world noticed. Each trait carried a cost. Discipline became distance. Ambition became justification. Humility became disguise. I told myself morality was a privilege for those who could afford it. But in Seoul, privilege always finds its way to you, dressed as opportunity, wrapped in velvet. By the time the first promotion came, I had learned the rule of glass towers. They don't collapse from impact. They collapse from reflection. And every day, mine grew clearer. The first lie never feels like betrayal. It feels like efficiency. I remember the day I realized integrity could be delayed like a payment. The office buzzed with the tension of quarter end, red numbers flickering like open wounds across monitors. Our team had missed projections by a fraction. My manager, Mr. Kang, called me into the glass meeting room and shut the door. He was a man who smiled only when it hurt someone else. He said, "If we adjust the timing on the reporting window, move a few line items forward, we can stabilize the forecast." It's not lying, Jae-min. It's alignment. That word, alignment, felt like silk around the neck. I nodded, adjusted the spreadsheet, and pressed enter. The numbers obeyed. So did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, replaying the sound of that keystroke, the quiet authority of numbers rearranged to protect pride. I told myself I'd fix it next quarter, but morality is like credit. Once you start borrowing, you never stop. In finance, everyone worships the same God: performance. There are no sermons, only dashboards. Our daily prayer was the morning briefing, rows of young analysts reciting market movements like monks chanting scripture. The senior partners watched, their eyes sharp enough to cut self-doubt in half. When bonuses were announced, the air changed. Smiles grew expensive. Everyone calculated everyone else's worth. I learned that envy could wear cologne and carry a Mont Blanc pen. To survive, I mimicked the predators. I started arriving earlier, leaving later. I memorized client birthdays, fund sizes, personal vices. Charm became a tool. Lies became lubrication. I told myself I was adapting to the ecosystem. But adaptation without ethics is just evolution toward the abyss. It started with information, not money. A client, the CEO of a construction conglomerate, invited me for dinner in Gangnam. He spoke with the slow confidence of men who never check the bill. Halfway through a third glass of Yamazaki, he said, "I hear your department gets early access to the ministry reports. A small peek could save my company millions. Of course, you'd be compensated. Discreetly." He smiled, not as a bribe, but as an invitation. And something inside me, that quiet voice that used to say don't, stayed silent. The next morning, I sent him a summary draft I wasn't authorized to share. He wired an advisory fee to an offshore account I'd barely dared to open. It wasn't greed, I told myself. It was gratitude. Repayment for years of hunger. I spent the money within a week. A tailored suit. A watch that clicked like validation. A hotel weekend to rest. Each purchase was a confession written in luxury. No one noticed the leak. The world didn't collapse. In fact, my numbers improved. The guilt faded like morning fog, replaced by adrenaline. Corruption, I discovered, has its own philosophy. It rewards intellect first. You begin to see ethics as variables, acceptable risk, plausible deniability, cost of conscience. Every immoral act can be reframed if your vocabulary is precise enough. I became fluent. Mr. Kang began to trust me with sensitive coordination. I was allowed into data rooms, internal audits, confidential forecasts. I told myself, I'm being promoted for talent. In truth, I was being groomed for discretion. The higher I climbed, the quieter I had to become. There's a saying among traders, you can't smell smoke from inside the fire. I thought it meant resilience. Now I know it meant blindness. With wealth came invitation. The city revealed its second skin, places that only opened after midnight, where deals were made without documents, where the cost of silence was measured in champagne. They called it the Velvet Circle. Fund managers, brokers, politicians, media fixers, everyone smiling too much, everyone pretending no one was listening. I learned the choreography quickly. Handshake, laughter, exchange. You don't speak in facts, you speak in insinuations. Every sentence ends with a promise that will be denied if written down. There was a woman named Soo-yeon, a financial journalist. Sharp, elegant, dangerous. She liked me because I was careful. I liked her because she wasn't. Our relationship started as information trade, a leaked headline for a quote, a tip for a touch. Soon it became something else, intimacy that smelled like risk. We met in hotel bars and called it coincidence. She said, "We both sell truth, Jae-min. You just charge more." I laughed, but the words left a bruise. Once corruption begins to feed you, it learns your appetite. I moved from leaks to manipulation. I'd plant rumors to nudge stock movements, then profit from the reactions I'd engineered. At first, I tested with small firms. Then I moved to conglomerates. Each success felt godlike, as if I could bend the economy itself to my will. But power is a drug that erases empathy. When my assistant warned that our data access looked suspicious, I told her, "Risk is the rent we pay for relevance." She resigned 2 weeks later. I didn't even ask why. I started forgetting faces of people outside my circle. When my mother called, I lied about visiting. When my father died, I sent money instead of going to the funeral. I told myself it was timing. In truth, I couldn't face the smell of the port. It reminded me of who I used to be before I learned to sanitize sin. One winter, Seoul was wrapped in cold blue light. Our firm hosted a gala at the Shilla Hotel. Gold, crystal, applause. I stood near the balcony, holding a drink that cost half my mother's monthly earnings. And I realized I couldn't feel anything. Not pride, not joy, just an echo. That night, a colleague approached me with a tip about a government infrastructure deal, the kind of leak that could make or destroy fortunes. He said, "We can front-run the trade." Just this once I hesitated, only for a breath, then nodded. The decision was mechanical. I had long since outsourced morality to convenience. That deal made me rich, really rich. And for 6 months, life shimmered. I bought a penthouse overlooking the Han River, imported marble floors, Italian furniture, whiskey older than my conscience. I told myself I'd finally arrived, but luxury has an echo. And in silence, it grows unbearable. Every night, when the city dimmed, I'd hear the faint hum of the servers in my mind, as if data itself were whispering what I refused to confess, that I had become everything I once despised. The more you have, the more you need to protect it. I started building firewalls, not for data, but for my soul. I cut contact with Soo-yeon. I deleted personal messages, burned notebooks, memorized lies. Each layer of defense made me feel safer, but safety is just the fear of being caught in disguise. Sometimes, when the elevator doors closed, I'd catch my reflection in the mirror panel, the same suit, the same calm face, but the eyes looked like someone waiting for a verdict. I didn't know it then, but the trial had already begun. Not in the courts, in the quiet chambers of my own memory, where guilt keeps perfect records.
The end didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. It arrived quietly. An email subject line blinking red at 6:14 a.m. Unusual activity detected. That was all it took for the empire to start folding in on itself. I stared at the screen for a long time. The words looked harmless, almost bureaucratic, but I felt it. The cold pulse beneath them, the mathematical precision of consequences assembling themselves. The firm's internal compliance division had flagged discrepancies in cross-border trades. A few irregular patterns, they said. Transfers routed through ghost accounts, none of which should exist. But they did. And one of them had my name attached in metadata that refused to disappear. For years, I believed I was smarter than the system. I'd encrypted, compartmentalized, anonymized. But arrogance has a half-life shorter than truth. And truth, I was learning, doesn't need evidence to make you sweat. They called it an internal review. I called it the prelude to crucifixion. Two men from compliance, dark suits, soft voices, escorted me to a glass conference room. They offered coffee. It tasted like caution. They asked questions that sounded friendly but carried razors beneath the tone. How well did you know the H Capital intermediaries? When did your contact with offshore accounts begin? Did anyone else instruct you to release the information? Their words were slow, rehearsed. Mine were quicker. Deflections, half-truths, performances of innocence. But something in my throat trembled. For the first time in years, my confidence had texture. Brittle, sharp, cracking. After the interview, I walked out into the Seoul winter. The city looked too clean, too honest. My reflection in the glass doors followed me, silent, complicit. By nightfall, my phone was already buzzing with messages from colleagues. Rumors travel faster than law. Half of them wanted to know what happened. The other half wanted to know if they were next. The official suspension came within 48 hours. All company access revoked. Laptop confiscated. Security escorted me through the lobby. The same lobby where I once shook hands, toasted victories, faked humility. Now every click of my shoes sounded like a confession. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. That's the cruelest thing about downfall. The indifference of everything you once thought revolved around you. I went home to the penthouse I'd bought with arrogance. Every surface gleamed, every object whispered guilt. The city stretched below like a circuit board of temptation. For the first time, I realized I didn't live there. I was trapped there. My luxury had become my prison. Then came the call from the Financial Crimes Unit, a polite request to appear for questioning. Politeness, I discovered, is how Korean institutions sound when they're certain you're guilty. News leaks are faster than justice. By the next morning, my face was on every financial blog. Seoul trader under investigation for insider leaks. No photo, no details, but enough to make the rumor machinery hum. Colleagues stopped answering calls. My name was scrubbed from the firm website. The silence was surgical. When I stepped outside, strangers recognized me, not as a person, but as a warning. I'd become a headline in human form. I tried to control the damage, called lawyers, deleted drives,
Contacted old allies who now acted like we'd never met. One by one, they ghosted me. In finance, loyalty expires the moment you become expensive to defend. The government audit lasted 6 months. 6 months of paperwork, interrogations, public hearings, each designed to peel off another layer of my denial.
They didn't need to yell. They had evidence, time-stamped, signed, irreversible. My offshore accounts, encrypted chats, travel records, each line of data like a nail hammered in slow motion. My defense was predictably pathetic. I claimed ignorance. I claimed pressure. I claimed industry norms. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about one bad choice. It was about the 1,000 small ones I'd rationalized along the way. When the verdict came, it was almost gentle. A suspended sentence, 2 years probation, hefty fines, lifetime ban from financial institutions. The judge said, "Greed without necessity is a disease of comfort." I didn't argue, because I was the diagnosis. Punishment doesn't end with sentencing. It lingers, in whispers, in glances, in the echo of your own name. I lost everything that defined me: my job, my income, my reflection. The penthouse went first, seized for liquidation. The car next. I moved into a one-room apartment in Mapo, a space so small I could touch both walls without stretching. It was the first honest space I'd lived in for years. Days blurred. I slept during daylight, walked at night. When you've lived in glass towers, shadows become a kind of mercy. I tried to find work, consulting, tutoring, anything. Everywhere I went, recognition followed. No one hires a man whose name smells of scandal. So I took a warehouse job under an alias, Mr. Han. Loading trucks, counting boxes, sweating through redemption, one pallet at a time. It was humiliating and purifying. Each night I'd wash my hands and stare at the calluses forming again. They reminded me of my father, the man I had once been ashamed of for smelling like oil. Now I longed for that kind of honest dirt. My mother visited once during the worst of it. She didn't scold me, didn't even ask what happened. She just brought fish soup and folded my laundry. When she left, she said, "When a net breaks, you don't throw it away. You mend it." Her voice was calm, like she'd already forgiven me before I knew how to ask. That night I dreamed of the sea, the smell of salt, the shout of fishermen, the sound of my father's wrench striking metal. I woke up crying, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood the currency of humility. Probation ended. The world moved on. But I didn't. Some crimes fade with time. Mine didn't. It lived in me, a quiet parasite feeding on memory. Even after paying the fines, after serving the suspension, I couldn't shake the feeling that the true punishment hadn't begun. Because guilt isn't something you complete. It's something you learn to carry without collapsing. Sometimes when I crossed the street, I'd hear snippets of traders talking, numbers, deals, laughter. It sounded like a language I once spoke fluently, but had forgotten. I felt both envy and relief. Freedom, I learned, sometimes means exclusion. I started writing in notebooks, not about markets, but about morality, about choice, about the anatomy of downfall. I called it the arithmetic of regret. No one read it, but writing became confession, and confession became a form of oxygen. Guilt has no schedule. It visits randomly, at dawn, in the grocery aisle, in the middle of a laugh that dies too soon. I kept seeing my old assistant in my dreams, the one who resigned before everything fell apart. In the dream, she stands in front of me and says, "You said risk is the rent we pay for relevance." Then she asks, "Was it worth it?" I always wake before answering. Some nights I walk the Han River, the same place I once considered jumping. The skyline reflects on the water, bright, sterile, unreachable. I stare at the buildings and whisper, "I'm still here." The city doesn't answer. It doesn't have to. In the end, what destroys a man isn't greed itself. It's forgetting what hunger was for. I chased wealth to escape poverty and ended up poorer than I'd ever been. Not in money, but in meaning. The punishment wasn't the law or the loss of status. It was waking each day to the memory of who I used to be and realizing that forgiveness must be earned in silence. Silence became my new currency. It was the only thing I still owned, and the only thing that didn't depreciate. After the warehouse job ended, I drifted through Seoul's older neighborhoods, Mapo, Songsu, Uljiro, the parts the city had outgrown but hadn't yet abandoned. Here, neon gave way to rust. Here, people still looked at one another when they spoke. I liked that. It reminded me that I hadn't always lived behind glass. Some nights, I'd sit in an all-night pojangmacha, plastic tent glowing orange against the dark. Men like me came there to drink quietly. Failures wrapped in cheap suits. No one asked questions. We didn't need to. The shame was self-evident, like the smell of burnt soju on our breath. One night, a man across from me, gray hair, calloused hands, said, "You used to work in finance, right?" I froze. He smiled, half pity, half recognition. "My son lost his job in that scandal," he said. "But I don't blame you. Everyone falls to something. The trick is learning what you fell for." Then he raised his glass, not as a toast, but as a mirror. I didn't drink. I bowed. That sentence, "learning what you fell for," stayed with me. For years I'd told myself I fell because I wanted more. But the truth was smaller, sharper. I fell because I wanted to matter, and I mistook wealth for worth. I started volunteering at a financial literacy NGO. Small office, 10 desks, fluorescent lights that hummed like tired insects. We talked debt management to families drowning in credit. At first, it felt like punishment. Then it started feeling like penance. The clients were ordinary. Taxi drivers, shop owners, mothers balancing 5 credit cards to keep their children in school. When they spoke about debt, their voices carried the same tremor I'd once heard in my mother's when she haggled over fish prices. It hit me that I'd spent a lifetime exploiting the very fear they lived with every day. A woman once told me, "I just want to sleep without hearing numbers." That night, I dreamed of balance sheets whispering like ghosts, profit and loss columns filled not with figures, but with names. I began writing again, this time not for strategy, but for honesty. Short essays, anonymous posts under the name Jagalchi-san, titles like "When the Market Becomes God" and "The Arithmetic of Shame." To my surprise, people read them. Students emailed me. One wrote, "You make ethics sound human, not moralistic." I wept reading that. It was the first time words had healed instead of sold. When spring came, I took a train to Busan. The sea smelled the same: salt, smoke, diesel. My mother was older, smaller. Her hands, still cracked, trembled slightly as she cooked. Over dinner, she said, "You were always good with numbers. You just forgot they're supposed to feed people, not swallow them." I wanted to apologize, but the word stuck. So instead, I washed the dishes and said, "I'm trying again." She smiled. That's all life asks. The next morning, I walked along the port. Fishermen shouted over the noise, dragging nets full of silver, flickering life. I realized the rhythm of their work, cast, wait, pull, was the opposite of how I'd lived. Calculate, predict, control.
The sea doesn't obey markets. It teaches surrender. Standing there, I whispered, "Father, I finally understand why your hands never stopped moving." It wasn't desperation. It was devotion. Work, even when thankless, was a prayer. Mine had become a performance. Years later, I found a way to live between what I was and what I could still be. I moved into a modest apartment near the Han River, small, uncluttered, facing east. Each morning, I walk the path by the water as sunlight glides over the bridges. The skyline still gleams, but I don't envy it anymore. It's just glass and gravity. It reflects, not redeems. I now teach part-time at a vocational college, a course called Ethics in Finance Beyond Numbers. The students are young, hopeful, still convinced that integrity can be systematized. I tell them, rules protect you from mistakes, not from yourself. They laugh, thinking it's cynicism. It isn't. It's memory. I begin each semester by writing one sentence on the board. Greed is not wanting more. It's being afraid you'll be nothing without it. I watch their pens move, their brows furrow. Some nod, some smirk. But every year, at least one student comes to my office later and says, "Sir, I think I understand now." And that's enough. At night, I still hear echoes, the sound of keyboards, the click of stock tickers, the pulse of profit. But they no longer command me. They've become background noise, like the hum of a city I can finally live in without performing for it. Sometimes I meet old colleagues by chance. They avert their eyes as if I'm contagious. A few whisper, "You were unlucky." I smile, because they're wrong. Luck is the lie we tell to excuse choices. I wasn't unlucky. I was unwise. And wisdom costs what ignorance saves. Soo Yun, the journalist, once reached out. She'd left the industry, started writing about social ethics. We met for coffee near Hongdae. She said, "You disappeared." I said, "No, I reappeared where no one was looking." We talked for hours about silence, media, greed, forgiveness. When we parted, she said, "You finally sound human." I walked home lighter. One rainy evening, I returned to the bridge where everything had begun. The night I thought about ending it. The night I learned that shame and survival share the same heartbeat. The river was swollen, the lights reflecting in broken patterns. I stood there, breathing in the metallic scent of the city, and spoke softly to the water. I once traded whispers for wealth. Now I trade truth for peace. A drop of rain slid down my face, indistinguishable from a tear, and that felt right. For years I'd chased purity, as if redemption required perfection. But redemption, I've learned, isn't clean. It's continuous. A daily audit between conscience and convenience. I still wake some mornings feeling unworthy, but then I remember my mother's words, "When a net breaks, you mend it." And so I do, slowly, quietly, every day. If my life were an account, the debits would be vast: arrogance, deceit, fear, loss. But on the other side of the ledger, small credits remain: understanding, humility, mercy. They don't cancel the debt, but they make the balance livable. Now, when I look at my reflection, the suit I wear is modest, the eyes steady. I no longer see a traitor or a criminal or even a survivor. I see a man who finally stopped mistaking mirrors for windows. The city still hums, money moving, lives colliding. But I've learned to listen differently, to hear not the transactions, but the breathing between them. Sometimes at dawn, I return to the river, watch the water fold the skyline back into itself, and I whisper to the current, "May we all learn the price before we pay it." The current never answers. It doesn't need to. Its silence is the purest truth I know.